Hi everyone, Robert Peak here from the Spontaneous Dungeon Master, and it's been great having conversations with a lot of you in the chat about this video series that I've been making about being more spontaneous in your D&D sessions as a Dungeon Master. And one of the topics that kind of came up, it was in a conversation on a video about kind of the first person point of view versus the bird's eye top down point of view, had to do with competition. And so I thought I'd do a bit of a follow-up video here about what I call fighting the competitive urge as a Dungeon Master. And what I mean by that is basically there can be a really subtle kind of latent tendency to want to get competitive in D&D. And it can happen even with the Dungeon Master. And I think it kills trust. I think it kills trust, and I think trust is one of the absolute foundations of spontaneous storytelling. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can build trust, how you can fight the competitive urge, what that means. It's really a topic that's important to me, that matters a lot because as a teenager, I played competitive chess. I played a lot of the big tournaments, National Open, other tournaments in Las Vegas for money, these huge halls. I still associate Las Vegas with migraine headaches and tremendous levels of stress. It's not a place I actually like to go anymore. I dropped out of that world pretty quickly, and since then, the idea of being highly competitive is kind of has a bad taste in my mouth. Because that was an extreme example in a lot of ways of a really, really competitive environment. And so with new players, one of the first things I point out is that D&D is not a video game. D&D is not a board game. You are not competing with each other. You are not competing with me. I'm not your adversary. I'm going to joke around a lot that I'm, an evil DM because it's fun and silly. But the reality is this is not a competitive game. It may be a form of cooperative competition. There may be a certain element of wanting to shine, certainly, in your team and to maximize your potential. That's great. But as a dungeon master, I mentioned this before. There's a power dynamic in place here that is really pretty particular to this type of environment. It's I guess somewhat similar, as I've said before, to a teaching environment, right? There's one of you, you have an authority kind of role. There's a lot of them, so they can make your life hell. You could try and make their lives hell, but why would you do that? This is for fun, right? And I always say D&D should never feel like homework. So not only is there this power dynamic with the Dungeon Master effectively being able to kill the players at any time, but the stakes are really high. I think the stakes are a lot higher than homework for a lot of people who've gone through kind of traditional schooling, because the stakes here are your characters, your creative, imaginative work that sometimes you've put in a tremendous amount of effort developing, not only the backstory, but in sessions. This character's evolved. This character's, in some ways, probably represents an aspect of you. I mean, I don't want to get sort of psychological and Gestalt therapy about it, or Jungian, but yes, I mean, there is an element where the character may not be you, but certainly knows a heck of a lot about you, and you're certainly invested in some level if you've been playing it in that way. So for the DM to hold this sort of Damocles over your creative efforts is something where you've really got to kind of trust the DM. You've really got to be willing to accept that the DM is not your adversary, but is playing an awful lot of characters who are adversaries, right? So this is where we get into that fundamental idea of player conflict versus character conflict, person versus persona. And being able to distinguish that, amongst players is incredibly important, and it's equally important that you understand that when you're playing the big bad evil guy, you're not big bad or evil, and you shouldn't be necessarily acting that way. Now, that all said, a lot of the fun of D&D for players is being challenged, right? But being challenged in a context where it's clear that you're doing so for the sake of fun and enjoyment. And one of the great lessons I learned recently, we just adopted a new rescue dog, and the person that was helping us with the adoption said, one of the things you really want to do is demonstrate leadership rather than dominance with the animal. And that really sunk in. I really went, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That leadership is about, hey, here's the clear direction we're going. Here's what's up. No, that wasn't the right behavior. Yes, that is. Here's a treat. Like that kind of thing, where you're clear, you're directed, and you're also kind. Dominance is something else. Dominance is about power. Dominance is about sometimes you being afraid of losing control of a situation. And so wanting to assert your will, sometimes for the sake of asserting your will. So you see the difference there, right? And I think there's a big difference between challenging your players and dominating your players. So, and then these power trips, these things can become really kind of subtle, right? And so when you then do get into role playing and shared storytelling and other aspects, if there's any kind of bad feeling or any sense of unfairness about the combat elements or about any of the other elements, the skill checks, whatever, it can kind of taint the whole things in subtle but pervasive ways. So one of the things I like to say, to combat all of that is, really make sure you have the conversation with your players, at the outset, right, if it's not obvious. And work with your players on the reasons behind your story focus, why you want to focus on story and be spontaneous and build trust, and that you are in fact trying to challenge them, but not kill their creative work, their character, this thing that they love. You're not trying to destroy that. You're trying to challenge them to help the character learn and grow and develop. I'll probably talk in a subsequent video about the hero's journey, the arc of progression that a character can take, that can be so satisfying when they do overcome challenges and not only level up, but grow and develop as characters, as individuals. I think you have to acknowledge too that, as players, we want to feel powerful. We want to feel powerful. We want to feel meaningful. For a lot of us, we want to be heroes. Why? Because we don't always in life, right? You don't always get to feel powerful and meaningful in everyday life, and life doesn't, frankly, always make a lot of sense. Whereas in D&D, there's rules. There's ways of understanding, what's going on and what's possible. It's kind of parameterized in a way that allows you, once you start doing it for a while, to settle in and to realize that there's a really nice framework here that can support you in this shared storytelling experience, as long as everyone's kind of on the same page about what that is and what that means. So I think it's also important to bear in mind that the flip side of this is that you do want to challenge your players. You don't want to go too far to the side of just always pulling your punches, always having a deus ex machina out there. And particularly with high-level players, a lot of DMs complain that can be a real challenge, right? So there's a lot of great stuff out there. The Monsters Know What They're Doing series and stuff that can help educate you if you do want to know more about how to handle the tactical side. But no matter how well you handle the tactical side, I think having the right spirit behind it is really key. One of the other things I like to do is I don't just, like I said, I don't necessarily stage these encounters. Players may encounter monsters that are way, way out of their league, or they may, be bashing on a bunch of really kind of easy kills based on what's appropriate to the story. So throwing monsters that make sense their way, and also recognizing that, for really high level characters, you're not going to outsmart 4 or 5 16th level characters, right? And it's no fun to just stampede them with Tarrasques either, right? So having some agreement and some understanding about what makes combat interesting, what makes difficult skill challenges and ability checks interesting, and so forth. It's why through the combat complications table in there, it's why I've been brainstorming and thinking a lot about how to make combat more than just two groups face off on a field, and whoever has the best ability scores ends up winning, or the most hit points. I've thrown mind flayers at my 3rd level characters, right? Now I had a potential deus ex machina kind of out for them, but I don't necessarily believe in that you always have to, kobold fight club it out and balance every encounter and whatever. I think if you're playing it for story, that you can risk a little more. You can go for that experience that is, hey, it's a big rich world full of all kinds of stuff, and players at low levels love encountering these really powerful, wonderful, iconic D&D monsters. They're out there. Why not use them? So why not use them? But again, in the spirit of challenging your players, making an interesting story, and letting them know, that they can trust you, that you're not just going to pull a power trip or clobber them for the sake of it. On the flip side, I always really kind of discourage too much sort of min-maxing. Again, you want to feel powerful, but I also set the tone straight away partly to make my life easier. So, for example, I use standard array or maybe point buy in the process of allowing my players to create characters and their ability scores. I had one player say, look, he rolled up this incredible, some incredible stats, and then the DM really struggled to challenge that player, right, as a result. So setting the tone early on, just saying, look, you're going to have an 8 somewhere. You're going to have a low score. You're going to have something where we're not playing the Marvel superheroes RPG, right? We're playing something where you have flaws, and that's part of the fun. All of these are conversations to have explicitly. All of these are conversations to have at the outset. All of these are principles to thread through the entire process of your role-playing game, because again, trust is the foundation. Trust is the foundation of spontaneous storytelling. And if your players see you as a kind of friendly adversary, maybe at most, or maybe even better, as an ally in a great storytelling experience, trying to create something that's meaningful for them. And at the end of the day, I think that's kind of ultimately what it all comes down to. Fight the competitive urge. Go for the meaningful urge. Go for that urge that causes you to want to explore and engage with your players in telling a story that you don't know exactly where it's going. You don't know exactly what the ending is going to be, but you trust each other to do a good job and do right by this meta level thing, which is this creative experience that you've all worked on together. You're not just gonna throw a bunch of rocks on them and kill them off because you got frustrated. So at the end of the day, take the high road. Fight the competitive urge. Remember that D&D is not a video game or a board game, and that's one of the wonderful things I think about it. It can go places that no board game, no video game ever could. But you've got to play it that way. You got to build the trust in your players. That's why you might want to fight the competitive urge.